Okay, so we're about ready to start putting it back together, and now I guess we can do some helpful hints. This assembly, you can screw with the timing on it, but like I said before, so once you get it out, you can actually spin both pieces independently. So again, on the piece that has the arm on it, the male piece fits in the V on this side. So that's how you time that. The last tooth goes in the last V. The other last tooth goes in the other last V. This gear, plastic, and it's got electrical contacts on the back that match up with those two electrical contacts there. So just make sure that when you put this together, obviously you flip the gear around the right way, and that there's nothing in the way of these contacts that would prevent them from making a connection. When I cleaned that female out, I used a cordless drill and a 25/64. Let me make sure I'm telling you the right thing. 25/64 drill bit. And to get it started, I put it in there, and I actually ran it backwards. And then I put it in forwards because I wasn't getting enough cutting action. It took quite a bit to ream it out to where that actually fit together. And there was a bunch of like white, tan, chalky stuff that came out of it. There's two bearings pressed in it, one here, and there's a space in between. So when water got down in it, that aluminum housing between the two bearings corroded, expanded, and pinched this shaft. This shaft has got some kind of coating on it. When you go to clean it up, I wouldn't do much of sanding on this because it felt a little bit rough, but I think it was rough because it was actually that part, the female, expanded and crunched in, which dented, into the side of the shaft. So I just very lightly cleaned this up, and I was pretty aggressive on this side. And now I can slide that assembly in and out of the hole without too much difficulty. I didn't want it flopping around, but I didn't want it nearly as tight as it was, which was a very severe hammer fit. So I think we're in good shape now. I'm going to blow that out with an air hose to get all the chunkies out of it. And by the way, when you're running the drill in it, hold it. I would suggest holding it this way and running the drill up from the bottom, so that when the stuff falls out, it falls, out on the tabletop, not the other way, which is into your grease that you want to save and reuse. So think of that when you're doing it, and just take your time, be careful. This is not hard, maybe a little bit tedious, but it's not hard. And I'm optimistic when I put it back together, this is going to work, because with that shaft seized in there like that, there was no way that motor was going to turn. So I just hope that module sensed that there was too much restriction and didn't fire the motor, and that's what the problem is. So we'll find out when we put it back together. As far as that gasket, that's going to be fine. When I took the screws out, that just fell right away. It wasn't stuck to the other side of the case, so I didn't tear that gasket at all. I am going to try and find a O-ring. That's my best guess at what that is supposed to be, is a totally roached O-ring that's underneath this cover that was sitting on the very end of that shaft as it projected through the housing. So I'm going to do my best to find that. I'm going to fill this hole with as much grease as I can get in there, and then when I push that shaft in, the shaft's going to push it forward and out the front, as opposed to contaminating the other kind of grease. Generally, you don't want to mix greases. So I don't know exactly what kind of grease that is, but I don't want to contaminate it any more than it is already. And I'm going to put a low viscosity waterproof grease in that, because this is going to be outside in wintertime, so you don't want the grease to get really thick and make more resistance for that motor to try and overcome. So I'm going to start putting this together now. Okay, so the motor went together pretty good. When you put this back together, there's a little black cap that belongs on this pin right here, because that is what this wear mark is because this metal pin only rests in that plastic gear, that plastic cap lets it slide in and out a little bit and ride against that cover to keep from coming completely out of that gear when it's running. So make sure the plastic cap is there. Like I said, this was all pinned together, so you didn't have to worry about that. I put the wave washer on this side because it was stuck in the grease over there. I picked it up, set it down, and I put some grease on top of it to hold it in place. I just wanted to make sure there wasn't any loose parts over here so that when I flip it over and put the cap on, you know, I didn't want stuff to shift. So anything that was movable is on this side now, and that's just a cover. Put a little bit of extra grease on it here, here, and here, and I pretty much moved the original grease around to be up around this spiral gear. And then I packed that female section completely full of grease, and when I pushed the shaft through it, you know, I pushed out any extra. So I greased the shaft and I greased the hole and pushed it through, and you know, just kind of to squeeze it in there as best I could. I did think about tapping this and putting a grease fitting on it, because you can reach this with the liftgate on. And I thought, I won't bother. What's the odds it's going to get stuck in the next 4 years, because I'm going to keep this truck for 4 years. So I'm optimistic this fix will last for 4 years and I won't have to touch it again. If I do, I know what to do. It's not that big a deal. But if you really wanted to, there's clearance in there to put a grease fitting in. You can put a grease gun on it, and you know, once a year put one shot of grease in it. And if there was any water pushed in it, you know, from rain, that would push it back out. So that's a thought too for those who might be so inclined. So I'm going to go ahead and put this cover on. I don't expect there's going to be any problem at all. Just flip it over, set the cover on it, put those fasteners back in it, put the module back on it, plug into the module. Then this cover goes on the motor, and there's 5mm screws that hold that on. So once I put it together that far, then I can go put it on the liftgate. And I'd like to test it before putting the wiper motor arm on it, and we'll go from there. Although I took it out with a T15, to put it back in I needed a T20. So the correct tool to get the fasteners out of the cover is a T20 Torx. So no problem getting the module back on. Again, just push it straight on and put the plug-in connector in. It'll snap right in, no problem. Now I'm going to see if I can figure out what O-ring fits in this groove, because it was actually a pretty fair-sized groove. We have two things that came off on that side. We have an O-ring and this nasty-looking cover, which I suppose is going to get snapped back on there, but it really looks like it does nothing. But I'm going to put it back on anyways. This, to me, looks like the working part, a well-worn O-ring. So I'll see if I got another one here. Okay, a little bit of trial and error, but I think I found an O-ring that fit it. It's a 012 size O-ring off of my handy-dandy set from Harbor Freight. Those are Buna O-rings, which are okay for grease. They're not okay for fuel. This has got grease on it, so that should be fine for this. So put the O-ring on, seated in the groove as best I could. Then I slid that plastic cap over top of it, and the cap had a ring all the way around the one side, and that was the bottom side. So I put the plastic cap over it, and I just took a long socket, slid it over it, tapped it with a plastic hammer to seat it. It was easy to get the O-ring in, but that cap didn't want to sit in the shoulder. I think the shoulder was still maybe a little bit corroded, so I tapped it, and it looks like it went together okay. So all of the internal assembly is done, kind of stuff. So now I'm going to put that cover on, and then I will walk over and test it. Now, I had been told that you need to make sure that you test it with the lift gate closed, because there must be a switch on the lift gate that tells the motor don't run. So I'm not going to put the arm on the motor. I am going to put that 7/8 nut on it to hold it on the door. And I'll put the other mounts on it because I'm assuming that this is going to work. But I do want to fire it up without the arm on it, just to watch it work before I go through the rest of the effort to put the whole thing back together and snap that cover on, because it's kind of cold out today, and when this cover goes together, clip, 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 and whoever put this on last time for me, they broke one of the clips, so I don't want to break any more. It'll hold together fine if I just am careful putting it back together, but I want to make sure that I don't bust one of them. Okay, so we got our cover on. We are ready to walk over and put it on the truck. I had to put fastener in. They are 5mm, so I used that dude right there, 5mm socket and ST handle. It made that simple. Those are threaded into plastic. Be really gentle. Just that's all you need to do. Any more than that, you're going to strip these things out. You're just tighten it up enough so that there's no space between the metal bracket and the plastic, and you're done.
Alright, so sorry about the lighting, but I'm doing this outside at night, so that's what the gate looks like before you put it together. And I'm sliding this up in the hole as such, and that stud over there is going to go in that hole right there, just like that. 7/8 wrench you're going to need, and there's a hex nut. So that nut and this washer in my finger, that goes through the gate. This goes on top of the exposed stud. That nut goes on top of that on the other side of the glass. So I'm going to put this down because I need both hands. Well, I don't know if you can see that, but it is actually working. It's on a timer, so this is delay right now. It looked like it had 0, 1, 2 as settings, and this is on the 1 setting, which is about 10 seconds apart, I think. Or maybe this one, yeah, that's the other setting, though, 5 seconds apart. One's about 3 to 5 seconds, the other one is about 10 seconds delay. So it's working correctly. So now I just need to figure out where to put the arm on it based on the degree of sweep. You can see the dirt mark on my window where it stalled, but it stalled mid-cycle, so I don't know exactly where it's supposed to be. So I guess I will just trial and error figure out where it's going to go. But I'm very happy. That was the right solution. And hopefully I don't have to do it again, but if you guys need to, now you know how. So the sequence in which parts come off of that wiper arm. Left to right. First you pry a plastic cap off. Excuse me, I got that out of order. This nut goes over here. And there's a light. So pry the plastic cap off, and then take the nut off, and then take the arm off, and then underneath it is a cover that goes over top of that hex nut that is a 7/8. To get the arm off, I use that puller, which that works for either battery terminals or for wiper arms. It worked fine. Once I got the nut off in 20 seconds, that was off too. So again, that is a 1/2" nut, and there is just a plastic cap over the top of it, so you just pry that out with a small screwdriver. Push the cap back on it, and that's what it looks like. So I took this part of the video out of sequence. It's the morning actually after I did the repair. I just want to show you how it is together. So that wiper arm, when it's mounted properly, it's horizontal facing the driver, and when it sweeps a full 180 and ends up on this side and then comes back. So if you have a motor that's stuck partway through its transition and you're not sure exactly how to put it back together, where its starting point is, that's how you do it. So there's a plastic cap, just pull that out, 1/2" nut, and after you use the puller to get the arm off, because you know you're going to put a clamp on here after the nut's off, and then you'll thread a screw in, and it'll pull that right off of there. Then you'll just have an exposed shaft. So then you have this plastic collar, I'll call it. Take a small screwdriver and slide it in there and kind of pop it off of there. When it comes off, you'll see a hex nut, and that's the main nut that mounts this motor in the glass. So that's what the 7/8 wrench is for. Again, a 1/2-inch socket to get into that recess, puller to get this off, small screwdriver to pop this off. Once that's off, then you have a 7/8 wrench or socket. You know, spin that counterclockwise to get that off. And then I didn't put the inside of the motor cover on yet. You have to take this nut off and that nut off. And once those three things are off, this whole assembly will come out of the back. And grab this. One thing that's not immediately apparent is there's a clip. Somebody broke this one off already before me. There's one here, there's one there, there's one there. So when this is together, you're looking at it like that. And to get those loose, because of the way that they're coming in, that tab points straight in this way. Straight in, straight in, straight in. And if this one wasn't broken off, it would point straight in. So you're going to have to get something flat, slide it in there, and pull this lower cover out, 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 one at a time when it's mounted on there. So pull it out and unhook it, and just work your way all the way around, snapping one off at a time. Leave this part of the cover pretty much where it is, or push in a little bit if you can. If you push in on this part, and you bring this part out, then you'll be able to separate those tabs without breaking them off. That's probably the least intuitive part of this assembly of how to get that off without breaking your tabs. But again, just push in on this part and pull out on that part for each tab, and it'll open up. Okay, we'll do a quick review of the tools used. The things that you must have. You must have a 1/2-inch socket and some kind of ratchet. This was a stubby, flexible one I had. That worked out fine. This is to take the nut off the wiper arm, and that's on top of the wiper arm before you take the wiper off. Underneath the wiper arm, you've got a 7/8 hex nut, so you could use a wrench or you could use a socket if you wanted to. Doesn't matter if it's open-end or closed, either one's going to work. It's not on all that tight, so you don't need a giant wrench. To make it easier to get the arm off without bending it up or anything, I used, in this case, this is a battery terminal puller. That worked good to get the wiper arm off. I actually have one that's meant for wiper arms. I don't know what I did with it, but this works fine for that purpose. You might be able to get it off without this, but honestly, I wouldn't try it. If you go to AutoZone or something like that, you can rent a tool, you know, deposit $20 or whatever, and use it and bring it back, and they'll give you your money back. It'd be well worth it to do that rather than potentially damaging the arm. To get the small fasteners off of the plastic cover, you need a 5mm. I'm thinking you're going to want to use a socket and some kind of extension rather than a wrench. You could use a wrench. It's going to take you all day if you do that. I wouldn't do that. Get a 5mm socket. The little tiny screwdriver, flat screwdriver for miscellaneous whatever when you got the motor apart. Use this to get the plastic cover halves apart. I'm not going to do that tonight as part of the video. In the morning maybe I'll take a shot of it to clearly show it in the daytime. To get the cover fasteners out of the motor itself, this is a T20 Torx, so you need that. Convenience item, to get the big blue gear in and out, it was handy to use a regular pair of pliers just to grab the shoulder on it to slide it in and out. Hard to get with your fingertips. It was easy to get with that. You're definitely going to need a mallet of some kind. This is a plastic one.
That's probably best because I could tap on the end of the shaft and not worry about damaging the shaft. After I got it moved a little bit, I needed some kind of a punch because once the shaft was partway retracted into the motor, you couldn't hit it with a hammer anymore. You had to hit it with something that could get down in the hole. And it was seized so firmly, I pretty much had to hammer it every fraction of an inch all the way through the motor until it came out. So this was a scrap valve out of motor I had worked on. So that's, I'm going to say between 5/16 and 3/8 diameter, probably 5/16. That worked out good. It was small enough to get in the hole, big enough not to be sliding off the end of the motor shaft all the time, or the actuator shaft. I only used this for a second just to seat the O-ring. You could probably do without it, but it was a convenience item, so necessity, something like this necessity, not exactly that. Convenience, Torx necessity, screwdriver necessity, small screwdriver necessity, all these things are necessity. 5mm, I'm going to say it's necessity, that puller. 7/8 wrench, 1/2 inch wrench. The only thing that, I don't know if this is here, this is a 10mm. That was used on the liftgate, on the inside of the liftgate, to take the 2 nuts off that hold the motor on, in addition to this big 7/8 nut. So that's going to be a required thing too. So 10mm, 1/2 inch. I don't know why they mixed fractional and metric, but they did. And 7/8. Okay, one last tool because it made it easy. I have this hook that I had made for something in the past, just a cheap screwdriver that I got hot and bent it and ground it down. That worked out really well to put that cover back together because it was flat and skinny, and I could get up right next to the glass better than using a regular screwdriver. It just, geometry wasn't working right, but this hook worked great. You know, it's like 35 degrees out here today. I was afraid I was going to break the plastic tabs off, but with this I could depress the tab enough to get it together without cracking it. So if you have something like that, that might be helpful if you're having problems.